With Shit Harper did. Oh, now it's on it. Hi everyone, my name is Nikki Young. I'm with Shit Harper did. I do video work and a bit of direct action coordination and a few other things. But so today is the online webinar with Hailey King and Erin Flegg. So the first thing that I'd like to do is acknowledge the territory that we are broadcasting on. Hailey is coming from Ottawa, which is Algonquin territory, I believe. And we are in Vancouver, which is unceded Coast Salish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. And the reason we do that is because it's really important to acknowledge the way that this land came to the way that we came to live on this land, and that is through genocide, and it's a genocide that's still continuing. So just acknowledging that first, and acknowledging that we take a position on that to stop it. Is really important, because I think that informs kind of all the work that we do. So we have Erin and Hailey here right now. Erin, is from Vancouver. She's been involved in climate change, direct action organizing for a few years now. She really helped do a really successful action a few months ago with Andrew Saxton and MP James Moore, where they picked up rocks from the beach that were recently covered in oil from an oil spill and dumped them on the podium, and that made quite a few headlines and was a really great creative action. And then Hailey made headlines just a few months ago, about a year ago now, over a year ago now, I think.
Over a year ago, yeah.
Yeah, when she interrupted the Prime Minister's wife at an internet cat video film festival. It was a charity for homeless cats, and Hailey raised a question about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and that maybe that's a better look for her husband's upcoming campaign strategy, which was actually the reason that they were using the Prime Minister's wife, because she's, a cat foster mom and very popular among animal activists. But it seems like she wanted to raise that there was, some more important issues there, and that made quite a few headlines. So I guess we could just get right into things. Is there one of you that wants to go first, or?
Doesn't matter to me.
Okay, I'll ask you, Hailey. So how did that action happen?
Okay, the Lorraine Harper action actually was like a really last-minute kind of spur-of-the-moment thing. CBC did leak the documents, kind of stating that Lorraine was going to be a bit of a pawn in Harper's campaign to soften his image, kind of make him look like a family man, and so on and so forth. And some members of Shit Harper did kind of caught wind that Lorraine Harper was kind of the host of this international cat video festival that was in Toronto at the TIFF Bell Lightbox Center. So she was kind of hosting this, and it was kind of put on by the Humane Societies, and just kind of making her look like sort of like this woman who's fostered upwards of 85 cats since she's lived at 24 Sussex, and this kind of just playing up the emotional thing. So I was in school at the time. I was actually in class 2 to 3 hours maybe prior to the start of this, when I got a phone call from Sean, a friend of mine, who caught wind of this like appearance she was making and managed to get a few tickets. So they purchased the tickets last minute, called me. I happened to be available, and women's issues was something that I was actually in school for missing and murdered Indigenous women, something I'd kind of been doing some work and some research on, was already pretty knowledgeable about, very passionate about. So they ended up calling me. I left class. I went home. I kind of got ready. I kind of wanted to look the part, because I knew it was a bit of like a bit of a classier event. Like they kind of staged it like a TIFF kind of event sort of thing. So I went on at home and just threw on a blazer and some makeup, and I was there 2 hours later. So like I said, it was really last minute. Really just happened. I didn't know days in advance, and so what we had done prior to, with maybe half an hour to spare before we had to get in line, was there was a coffee shop across the street. So I met with a few of us. We met at that coffee shop and sort of had half an hour to hash out what exactly I was going to say or do once I got in there and when I should interject her. And we decided on my question that I would interrupt her during her, just sort of as she's introducing herself, and just logistics about where we should sit. Nikki, who was actually also there, he was there kind of sort of with media, I guess, like he was there recording. We had Shane, another friend, recording as well, so he was sitting with a camera a couple rows ahead of me, and so we set it all up in about 3 hours, give or take, and then we just did it, like we winged it pretty much.
What about you, Erin?
If we want to talk a little bit about the James Moore action and some of the media components that went into that, it was also planned fairly quickly, although it was we had a little bit more time, a couple of days, I think. But for something like that, the first thing you want to consider is what your message is. So if you're dealing with media and you're dealing with things like press releases, you want to know what the key point is, what key pieces of information you need to get out, and what parts of the actual action you want to get out. So for that one, our key point was that the oil spill in English Bay had just happened, and the government was claiming that I think something like 96% had been cleaned up within the first 36 hours. And we knew that wasn't true. We had examples of oil that had been washing up on beaches, all the way from West Van to New Brighton Beach. And so we collected some examples of that. And so we knew we had these conservative MPs giving a press conference about a highway expansion, and their messaging was that this was going to make things safer for North Van residents. So our message really was that if the Conservatives are so concerned about safety, then what are they doing leaving gobs of highly toxic bunker fuel showing up on beaches? So we knew that that was our key point. So we built our press release around that. And the next thing you want to do is really check your facts. So we wanted to know exactly what the numbers the government was putting out, what the information on the ground was, and being able to back it up. So that's why we ended up with these, a bucket full of rocks and sticks with oil on them, and we wanted to make sure that that got out. So kind of the next thing to do with our messaging had to do with the image of that. We wanted people to actually see it because it was just something we thought was very, very visceral. So we had people doing photography for that. We had people doing video, and people who knew how to edit those things so that we could get them out pretty quickly. So we were lucky that it went off pretty well without a hitch. We got some good responses, and people who were there were definitely interested, and the Conservative MP responded the way you would typically expect a Conservative MP to respond to, having oil-soaked sticks on the face. So that's interesting. And then kind of the next thing you want to talk about is where that's going. We were talking a little bit just now about media lists and who it's going to go to and what news outlets and what sort of reaction you're expecting from that. One really great thing about that action was that because it was a Conservative press conference, there were media already there. So there were camera people, there were photographers, there were writers with their notepads already out. So we showed up and all of the cameras suddenly pointed at us, which was fantastic. Because one of the challenges you often have doing media for actions like this is getting outside media in, getting the attention of mainstream media in particular. So you're doing stuff like this, your focus on the activist community, you're going to have a little bit easier time getting attention from people who are already kind of on side. And it can be tricky to get bigger media outlets or media outlets who are less likely to report in your favor out there. And so events like that where they're already there can be really super convenient for you. So we really made use of that. We really talked to all of those reporters. We let them know that we were holding a press conference later on in the day at that MP's office. Unfortunately, he didn't actually show up because he knew that we were doing that because we had already crashed his own press conference. But it was still a really helpful thing to have those people there, and that was kind of the key to getting that one out there.
Cool. What do you think are some things that you can do to make media focus more on the question that you're asking and not just the fact that you're disrupting an event?
Sorry, do you want? So one of the things that that was kind of, I was after the initial action, I kind of got some advice from some people who had already kind of pulled off actions about how to handle the media. And one of the things I was kind of told was to kind of really think about the question and prepare yourself, and sort of kind of keep in mind that, especially with mainstream and disruptive events like this, as you were saying, is like you want them to focus on the message and not the disruption. So like kind of having some answers ready for questions that you may or may not be asked. Understanding that some media outlets are not going to be kind of in support of your views or your disruption, and that they're going to kind of ask you questions and kind of maybe attempt to lead you down, because they are reporters, and they're good at usually getting what they want out of you and to make you look a certain way. So kind of sticking to your guns and your facts, and kind of not letting them lead you in any particular direction to kind of like make you look like a villain or whatever, which, when you are disrupting, there were some people after my action, I was the heckler. That was what I was called, and I was like, poor sweet Laureen was just there for the cats, and then there I was, this monster. I was like the college student heckler that they had, like, so like just stick to your guns, make sure like you make the point that you're trying to make, reiterate your message, know what your message is. Like, it's always good to like be really informed and like in the know about what you're talking about, and sort of, especially because, like I said, they do know what questions to ask, and if they want to trip you up, like, they're going to try to.
What do you think about that, Erin?
There are a couple of things that you can do. As Hailey said, knowing your answers inside and out is really important, and being able to anticipate the kind of spin that maybe antagonistic media is going to put on your work is really important, because you can kind of battle that before you go in, and you can know how to answer those questions, and that can be super useful. The other thing is that it's a really good idea to have on your media team, or within your kind of broader affinity group, somebody who can act as media liaison. So somebody who's super well versed in the facts, somebody who's comfortable talking to reporters, maybe comfortable talking on camera if possible, who's sort of in charge of doing that. So they've got their talking points, they know how to really stick to those talking points and resist getting pulled off track. And the other thing a good media liaison can do is, if they're not the one who's giving the interviews, they can hook up the reporters with the people who are doing the interviews. So one of the problems that you often run into is that reporters will try to find anyone who will talk to them. One of the things we ran into on Burnaby Mountain is that there was sort of a core group of people who were there holding the fort down and doing most of the work, and then there were a lot of people coming and going at different times who had different levels of involvement. And often what reporters would do, if they didn't get the answer that they wanted, or they didn't get to talk to the person that they wanted to see, they would just find the nearest person who was willing to talk on camera. And most often that person was a straight white man who may or may not have actually been there before, which can be problematic when that person is representing your action or your endeavor or whatever it is. So having a person whose job it is to kind of intercept those things and direct reporters to the people that really have the message, or the people who really are the core people involved in your action or your event, can be really useful.
If I could just, another thing I found after my action, which is kind of might be good to keep in mind, is like your social media, because it wasn't an hour after the actual event took place that I had people had found my, like, it was kind of breaking news. It was released, so like in a viral event it will be, and within an hour, 2 hours, people had found my social media and were actually quoting me, like my Twitter account, everything like within media pages. So being mindful that, like, if you're doing a viral event, I think one of the things I'd said right after it happened was, speak the truth even if your voice shakes. And within 2 hours, that was in the CBC in an article that they were doing. So being mindful of, like, if you are pulling off an event that happens to be, viral or like breaking or something like that, of that nature, just kind of being ready for the fact that they're going to look you up and they're going to find like every account that you have, which is what happened. I had like Facebook messages and Twitter messages, and sort of, so just kind of keeping that in mind, I think is important.
I guess one other kind of bonus about having one specific person designated to doing media, especially when you're working on a larger team, is that one person is less likely to get your messaging confused or to give different stories when it's just one person, whereas if you have multiple people they might have to be like, oh, what were you saying about this? Or, yeah. So then I guess we could talk a bit about the effect that your actions had. So, Erin, do you want to speak to that? And was it, did James Moore actually quit his job a few months after? Or?
I don't think so, unless he did it without my hearing about it. It's possible, but I didn't hear about that.
I think I might have.
But we did get a decent amount of play for that one. They really tried to play up the, we're doing this for public safety. They're interrupting our press conference on something else, and we're trying to keep everybody safe and do this thing for the residents of North Van. But the response, I think, was generally fairly positive. It was a fairly impactful action visually. So there was video of it, and there was video of it on other media networks. And it made for some really good, Instagram photos and tweets and things like that. It's always a good idea to have somebody who's kind of on the ball with those things, because, kind of the upside to things like, Twitter and stuff like that is really easily accessible is that it's easily accessible. So if you've got somebody live tweeting your event and who's done their research about what kind of hashtags on the thing are trending, like, we had, there was a van oil spill hashtag that was trending pretty heavily, at least locally, so we were able to tap into that. And yeah, it made a fairly big statement. Also, the facts we had were super solid, and the physical evidence of the oil still being turned up on beaches when they were saying things like they had cleaned up 95% of it was a pretty powerful message in and of itself. So I think we did a good job of pairing the image of it with the channels that we used to get it out, and that led to reporting being largely in our favor.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about you, Hailey?
The effect, I think the effect of the Lorraine Harper action was I think it was hugely worked in sort of the favor of the message that we were trying to portray. Lorraine's response to my question, which was, just to reiterate, which was sort of, don't you think taking a stance, government action and inquiry into the missing or murdered Indigenous women in this country would be a better look for Harper's campaign than supporting homeless cats? And her reaction was wasn't a good one. It wasn't it wasn't a great reaction, but it was perfect for sort of what we wanted to do, which was expose sort of their stance on it and just kind of show how how cold and silent they've been on the issue. And to quote her directly, that's a great cause, but that's another night. Tonight we're here for homeless cats, and if you'd like to donate, we would love to take your money. We would love to take your money. So that went viral across all of the media outlets, and kind of really was a really great example of how cold they've been on the issue. Not only that, though, that's sort of now ever since, for the year and almost a year and a half after, Lorraine Harper she's associated with cats. I know a few months back CBC posted an article because it was big news that Lorraine Harper now has a Facebook page, and that was news. And the first comment on her first post was meow or something, and it's all about cats. And every comment on Twitter, the Cats Who Care hashtag was created, and these were people sending me or tagging me in, and still, honestly, from time to time to this day, still happens. People were taking pictures of their cats with little signs saying, hey, Lorraine, donate my portion of the proceeds to an inquiry, or hey, Lorraine, I care about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Do you? So this, and there must have been between 50 and 100 of these pictures, and from time to time, I still get one. You can see them if you look for Cats Who Care on Twitter. There's a bunch of them. Not only that, as I said, people have been contacting me. Families of the women that have been missing or murdered. I still have a few friends here in Ottawa, I see still, who have lost sisters, aunts, things like that. So that was very powerful. I received, I had a lot of responses from families, a lot of conversations with families that were really sort of touching. People who were, very thankful or wanted to reach out and support this action. And then the adverse. I had people who called me rude. I had, after speaking to the families and hearing their thanks or their support, none of those other voices really mattered to me at that point. So like I think it really was very effective. On top of that, Lorraine Harper has, maybe she's done one now. I think there was like a beekeeping incident or something, but she has not done one other event like they had planned in the leaked documents, similar to the Cat Video Festival after we disrupted her, which is, again, like a huge success.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like an action or a public relations event that was meant to harness the power of cats on the internet ended up turning them against.
Yes. And, oh my goodness.
Cool. So that's what can go right. Maybe we should talk about what can go wrong. Maybe Erin, since you have a little more like long-term experience organizing, have there been any nightmares or close calls, or what are things that can really go wrong when you're doing this kind of thing?
We had a close call a few months ago following the Burnaby Mountain where we disrupted a set of Kinder Morgan employees at a restaurant in North Vancouver. They were still really pumping this local angle, saying that the oil from the expanded pipeline was going to be good for the economy, it was going to be good for local residents, that Kinder Morgan cared, that they were the most responsible company and had been responsible for X number of years on X number of projects. And so we really wanted to kind of take it to them and again take an opportunity to show some of the real facts on that one. And so we found out through a friend of a friend that Kinder Morgan had planned this like employee appreciation dinner at a restaurant called Fishworks in North Vancouver. And so we planned to disrupt that, doing a silent action, printing out a bunch of large photos of some of the oil spills and some of the effects of climate change that the Kinder Morgan pipelines had directly contributed to, and holding those up in the restaurant. So we did our research. We had somebody there to give us some information about when the people would be there and what the schedule of events was, to let us know the door would be unlocked, things like that. So we wrote up our press release, we got our materials ready, we got our media list ready so that we know who we want to send it to when the action was actually happening. We staked out a location around the corner. There was a coffee shop there where a few of us could sit and monitor the event and be online, be posting photos, be posting video, and be sending out the press release when it was time to do that. And it started off pretty well. Everything went to plan, and we got in there and we disrupted the dinner, much to the chagrin of the people who were there, who responded pretty violently, actually. That's one of the things that if you're doing any kind of action to be ready for it, is that it's sometimes hard to predict how people are going to react, and there were these like large men really getting up in the faces of the people who were in there, silently holding photos. Some of them even had, I think, climate justice on like markers pasted over their mouths. They were being very quiet, and there were people like pushing them and shoving them and pulling things out of their hands. So, that was a little bit unexpected. But one of the things that started happening was we kept hearing them say that, we're not who you're looking for. We're not working on pipelines. Like, we're not those people. You got it wrong. Those of us sitting on our laptops in the coffee shop around the corner sort of panicked a little bit and said, did we miss something? Did we do our homework wrong? Are these not Kinder Morgan employees? Are these not pipeline employees? And so we did a lot of very frantic fact-checking, making some phone calls both to the restaurant, to the company where these people said that they worked, and we figured out that they were in fact Kinder Morgan employees, but they were employees of the wharf in North Van, so they were not directly involved in building or planning a pipeline, which was what we had originally thought going in, based on the research that we did do. And that was something that showed up in the press release that we had written. These people working on the Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion, going through Burnaby, need to take responsibility for their actions, et cetera, et cetera. And we found out that they were not, in fact, working on the pipeline. We had to change all of that before we sent anything out. And we were lucky. We were right in that they were Kinder Morgan employees. And in the end, all of us doing that action believed that even if those workers weren't directly building a pipeline that was going through Burnaby, they still worked for Kinder Morgan. Everybody knew what that company did. Even if they claimed they were a different arm of the company, You know, they knew that they built pipelines that spilled, and we expected them to take responsibility for that. For them to say that's another arm of this Kinder Morgan company we work for wasn't good enough. So we were really lucky in that we were actually able to regroup, modify our press release and the things that we were sending out to reflect that situation, and to be able to say that, you know, we know these aren't pipeline workers, but we also believe that they need to take full responsibility for what their company is doing. But it was a really tense half hour of fact checking that went into that, and yeah, we were lucky that we were able to come out of that one okay. But it's definitely a good lesson that everything needs to be fact checked, thoroughly fact checked by multiple people, hopefully, and that doesn't just mean, you know, a few internet searches. Often that does mean making phone calls and asking questions, you know, visiting venues, visiting people to find out exactly what you're doing, because it's really difficult to anticipate those spin questions if you've got some of your information wrong. And media that's less inclined to be friendly is going to slam you on those when they find those. So we were lucky to find them before we sent them out, and get the correct messaging out when we did that. But yeah, definitely a good lesson in that one.
So do you take into consideration who you're going to send press releases or media to, depending on what kind of action you're taking? Like if you're taking like a really gnarly direct action where you're blocking something or masking up, or as opposed to something that's more gentle, like doing a candlelit vigil or a song or something?
Yeah, to a certain extent, because you want to be aware of who's going to be coming at you with those spin questions and those trying to undermine you kind of questions, and who's going to report what you tell them, and who's going to do a little bit more digging. Like, for example, Media Co-op, the website that has news sites in a bunch of different cities, Media Co-op Vancouver's, there's some people that we work with really frequently. And, you know, they're pretty trustworthy folks. They're going to come and they're going to take pictures and they're going to report honestly. And they're also a fairly grassroots, activist-y type site to begin with. So they take a lot of our information and they report it as we give it to them, because they're involved and they know what's up. But for places that are less likely to do that, that's where it's even more important to be really straight up with your facts and really straight up with who your media liaison is, who your interviewees are, and connecting those. And yeah, often if you're doing like that, all of these actions we're talking about are 100% above ground. You know, they're public. Anybody could have gone to them. We as part of the Fishworks event, you know, we tweeted beforehand saying, you know, this is about to happen. This is going on now. Here's some pictures. Come down. And, you know, got more people to come talk to people in the neighborhood, stuff like that. So anything like that you know is above ground, you know, you don't necessarily have to limit your media list very much for something like that. You know, people can have their faces fairly safely. People can have their names, things like that. If you were going to work on something a little bit more underground, I mean, I don't have a ton of experience with that sort of stuff, but you want to be more careful about who's in arrestable positions and who's not. You know, if the person that you're directing media to is in a position to give their name and their faces, you want to know those things ahead of time. You want to know who's willing to, and you want to know if there are people who are not willing to, so that you're not directing media to those people and you're not posting photos of them on social media. So, you know, being aware of who in your group is prepared to do what, you know, who has, you know, safety risks for things like that. It's really good to be aware of those, because then you can decide who's going to be the face of these actions and who isn't.
Cool. So I guess I'll ask Hailey now, but then Erin, you can chime in on this too. How much of the action is the action itself, and how much of the action is media, in terms of the effect and in terms of the effort you put in? And
so I would say, well, for an action like mine that was fairly, like, I mean, the planning and the actual pulling off of the action, I had help from quite a few people, but when it came to the media, that was pretty much solely on me, because it was kind of like a solo action kind of thing. So I would say a lot more of energy went into sort of dealing with the media afterwards. So the action, like I said, it happened kind of, and it was a quick thing. Even you know, the amount of time I was speaking and the amount of time it took them to pull me out of there, it all happened very fast. Even the preparation, very fast. But I dealt with the media for about 7 days after that. And one of the things that, you know, someone with more experience with dealing with media, because I hadn't had a lot of experience with the media prior to this, had kind of told me was that with sort of the action and the response that I was getting from it was just to kind of be mindful of the highs and the lows, because for 7 days it was very very intense. I had emails, Facebook messages, and tweets coming in from, you know, reporters from across the country, from the Toronto Star to the CBC, to the Vancouver Observer, like just from the entire, like, iPolitics. Like, I was doing interviews with just like a pretty wide range of people, and then of course, you know, I did, you know, Skype calls with like different Aboriginal and Indigenous sort of news outlets, and like students that were reporting from universities. So like just so many people were kind of coming at me and wanted to speak, and that was like, it was kind of exhilarating. Like, it was the energy that I had to put into it. It was stressful, you know, and it was pretty emotional too. But then, like, one of the things when I mentioned highs and lows is like you go from like this just insane amount of media to kind of just quiet. Like, you know, that 15 minutes that your story gets kind of goes away. So to be mindful of, like, you know, you go from crazy amount of energy and then it just kind of like simmers out. I had like, I think like my social media, I went from like 70 people that I actually kind of pretty much knew to like 700 within 24 or 48 hours. So like I said, it was really intense, and then it was not at all anymore. So like being mindful of like the crash of that, and a lot more of your energy does go into kind of fielding media.
What about you, Erin?
Yeah, I think in many cases the balance is a lot different than you would think. Proper preparation and proper use of networks and social media and things like that can really make or break an action. There was one that was, I think, a couple of years ago that Rising Tide Vancouver did that was called Frack Christy Clark's House. There was an action where they put up a homemade fracking rig on Christy Clark's lawn, which actually is a few blocks away from my house, and had people dressed up with you know, reflective vests and hard hats and bags of money and things like that, and fracking her lawn, basically, you know, right there, and taking photos and doing video and things like that. And that was done, I think, on a weekend, fairly early in the morning, like 8 or 9 o'clock, and there was just a handful of people there doing the action, and a handful of people there doing, you know, photos and setup and takedown and things like that, you know, watching for cops to arrive, stuff like that. And it was over really quickly. Same thing, you know, they put up the fracking rig, took some photos, did a little bit of video, and then the cops showed up and said, you know, get on the sidewalk, or, you know, you have the potential to be arrested. And you know, nobody really planned to be arrested. Everybody knew this wasn't going to be a, you know, a big long lockdown sort of event. It was just kind of a fun thing that was meant to draw attention to the fact that Christy Clark was fracking other people's homes without permission. So it was, yeah, it was started and done all pretty quickly, pretty quietly. Not very many people there, not very many media outlets, and it all, you know, it went well, but it was quiet and small. But the next thing that they did was everybody went home and processed the video, made it into something that was, you know, suitable to push out over media channels, contacted their media lists, sent out their press releases, said, you know, photos are available upon request, et cetera, et cetera. And within a couple of hours, the Globe and Mail was on the phone, Canadian Press was on the phone, Vancouver Sun was on the phone, you know. I guess same thing, news outlets from across the country wanted to know what happened, you know, even though it was this action that took place over the course of maybe half an hour and had probably less than 10 people in attendance, all told, you know, media backup, and people actually doing the actions. So without that preparation, without the press release, without the people to do the photos, without the people to do the video, to edit the photos, to be available for interviews, and to take all of those phone calls, that action wouldn't have gone anywhere. But because all that preparation happened and all those people were in place, you know, outside what maybe was the immediate visual of the action, it went across the country, you know, making headlines, you know, from here to Ontario, etc. So, yeah, I think often the lead up and the prep and the media and the follow up are actually what gets an action out, what makes it so that people know about it and so people see it.
That's cool. Yeah, that reminds me a bit of an action in Ontario where a few pipeline protesters showed up outside the Premier of Ontario's house with gigantic cardboard cutouts of flip-flops with letters written on them. To try to deliver the letters. They were like, some of them were like 7 feet tall, to her house. So it was almost like they were legitimate pieces of mail, and that was kind of how they got around. Like, but yeah, I mean, so in terms of like how accessible these actions are, I mean, there wasn't even any opportunity. Like, there was no event that happened at Kathleen Wynne or like these premiers' houses. I mean, the activists just created the spectacle. Sometimes you have to wait for an opportunity, like you have to wait for Lorraine Harper to announce an event, but you don't always have to have that barrier. So what do you guys think are barriers that people feel around doing this kind of actions, and how do you like, are those real barriers, or like are they just kind of things in people's heads, or like how are ways that people can get around those?
I think both. So I mean, it's without kind of my knowledge of shit Harper did and some of the actions prior, and like kind of seeing these actions take place, and like you know, I never attended any kind of info session or had done anything kind of like this, so it never really occurred to me that actually I could be a part of something like this. Like, it's not something I think that just comes to you really naturally without sort of, for the most part anyways, kind of seeing examples of it. And once you kind of see and you realize that, like, you actually really, I mean, maybe not alone, but with even a small or a large network of people, like, you can really pull these things off. With that said, though, as was mentioned before, you know, some people do have barriers, limitations, whether it's, you know, putting their career on the line, the fact that they can't be named or shown in the media, like, those are very real and very justified reasons why maybe you don't want to play a lead role, or maybe that you can't take place at all, or you can just share the stories, or, you know, whatever. So, like, I think those are two things. But, you know, as far as, like, realizing that, like, hey, like, pretty much it is, you know, there's no specific type of people, like, pulling off these actions. Really, anybody can, like, you know, get their creative, like, I guess, going, and, like, you know, meet up with a couple friends, brainstorm some ideas, make an action plan, and kind of pull it off. You know, there was another action we did. I'm not sure if you guys remember this one. It wasn't so big, but it was we barricaded James Moore cabinet minister's office door in Toronto with donated canned food. So we actually reached out to the Shit Harper Did network to try to donate some canned food in response to a quote that he had said in the House of Commons, which had been, "Is it my job to feed my neighbor's children? I think not." And within a couple of weeks, like, all we did was, can you donate a can here and there, and I think four, maybe five maximum of us, we just brought dollies in, we went up, you know, it was just 5 of us, there was no media there, just, like, you know, our own cameras, and we had a big sign that said, you know, it is your job to feed your neighbor's children. We barricaded, sort of, because of fire restrictions, we sort of barricaded the door, and then we're taken by security, and that was, again, like Erin was saying, it was just sort of like, you know, a few people, no media, nothing. It took place over the course of an hour, and then we left. And then after, it was all just editing. And it was just like regular, that was my first action, actually. And it was just like regular Joes who had never pulled off an action before. And, like, it never occurred to me to do something like that. But now that you have an example and you see that it can be done, that, like, it can be done, and it is pretty accessible.
There are a couple of things. Actually, when you're talking about the risks involved in direct action, things like arrestability, like Hailey mentioned, whether there would be an impact on your career, your housing, kids, things like that. Media roles can actually be really great for getting around some of that stuff. If you don't want to be the person who's the face of the action, if you don't want to put yourself in an arrestable position, being one of the people who's able to write the press release, send press releases out, tweet things, take photos, stuff like that. Those are all really great ways to still be involved in super crucial aspects of actions without putting yourself at risk of those kinds of repercussions. In terms of barriers, I think one of the barriers, if we're talking about media, one of the things people often think is that the mainstream media is this kind of inaccessible monolith. The reporters are not, you can't call them up on the phone, they're hard to find, convincing them to come to your action is pretty tricky. But when you get down to it, they are just regular people, especially if you're talking about people within your own city. They live around, they're on the internet, just like you are, and so with a little bit of work, you can find them just as easily as anybody can find you. You can use Facebook, you can use Twitter. Often reporters are very active on Twitter and will respond to messages. Reporters often want tips. They want to hear about things that are going on. A sort of sensationalist headline is, something that people will look at and grab onto. And so, if you can present something that might pique their interest, often they'll want to come to your event. It's just a matter of finding them. Mm-hmm. So most times, also, if you're talking especially about major newspapers, a lot of reporters will have beats, and you can do a little bit of research and find out what reporters have been covering the types of subjects that you're talking about at your action. You can Google their work, and often at the bottom of their articles they'll have an email address. So you can just use their email address. You can look on the mastheads of newspapers online. You can call the head offices and find out phone numbers for individual reporters. When you do a little bit of research, they're actually pretty easy to find, and you can start compiling those things. The other thing is that the mainstream media is not the be-all, end-all. If you look around, there's lots of grassroots media that gets a lot of attention, and that can pass your message on. And if all else fails, you create your own media. That's part of the point of why we have these teams and these people doing these actions, is that in taking photos and taking video and creating stories that go up on social media, you are being the media. You are filling in the gaps that the mainstream media is leaving open. You are correcting the errors and misreporting that mainstream media does. And that's really important. That's a really powerful thing that you can do. And you don't need to rely on that mainstream media to make change and to make some impact. So yeah, that's one of those things you can just jump in and you can use your creativity, like Hailey said, and find new ways to present your messages and your stories. That's great. It's a really powerful thing to do.
And I guess since we're talking about arrestability, neither of you have ever been arrested. Is that correct?
No. I was escorted off the premises, but no, I was never arrested. They did take, I will say this, they did ask for my identification, and they wrote down everything from, my name, my address, my phone number. They took all of that info. They looked at my 2 pieces of my ID, which they made me, after showing me the RCMP badge, they made me give them. And after that, I was banned from commenting, liking, and sharing and tweeting to Stephen Harper's Facebook page. Still to this day, I cannot comment on any post that Stephen Harper makes. So there's that. But no, I wasn't arrested. I was taken out though.
And then Erin, you've never had any trouble?
Yeah, I was arrested on Burnaby Mountain, but not for any other action that I've been a part of.
And so you were arrested, but you weren't charged? Is that how that went?
Charges were eventually dropped for everybody that was arrested on the mountain.
Right. Yeah, so I think something that's sort of important to notice is that if you get arrested, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to have a criminal record. It doesn't mean oftentimes arrests are thrown out because they don't want to have to, like the court case of explaining that, yes, we're charging these activists for standing up for things that most people agree are right, is actually more of a burden and a detriment to the public relations image than just having you arrested and removing you from the place, which essentially fixes the immediate problem, but then just dropping the charges. And yeah, cool.
Yeah, that often happens, but it's something to be well aware of when you're going into an event like stability and the different roles you can take on. You don't have to take on an arrestable role at all, and if you do, again, it's good to do your research and know what the risks are and what the likelihood of being arrested are and what the consequences of that could be, so that you know what's going on from start to finish.
Cool.
Also, I think it's important to note, with some sort of grassroots organizations or groups, or even just like there are sort of legal services available that are willing to support people doing these actions. So like whether it be kind of, if you're doing something there's a chance of arrest, it's worth a shot to look into sort of the lawyers and things that support these kind of actions or support other activists. And a lot of time, sometimes lawyers will take on pro bono cases for causes they believe. So like if you know for a fact, it's definitely worth looking into, because I know that there are some networks who do have lawyers who will back them up in the event of arrest.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's just also good to note that, I mean, I guess if this is specifically about disrupting conservative events, that there is nothing illegal about asking a question, which is really what we're doing. I mean, you know, of course, a lot of this stuff can be used for more direct action, like more like hard direct action stuff where you're blocking and that stuff is very like highly arrestable. But if you're asking a politician a question, really there's no chance, almost no chance you're going to be arrested. You'll be escorted, you might be detained, but you won't. There's nothing illegal about asking a question, and the only reason that the journalists aren't doing it is because, you know, they won't be invited back. So we don't really worry about being invited back too much.
There's a good chance you will be banned, actually.
Yeah. Is there anything I'm missing? Do you guys want to touch on anything else?
I think we're about out of time.
Well, thank you guys so much, and I hope you keep doing the amazing work that you're doing because, well, it's giving me something to talk about. So.
Good luck on your future events and like actions, and hopefully like we will start to see more sort of these things popping up, especially with the election coming. Hopefully, like, you know, and even beyond the election, you know, to see sort of the general population kind of getting involved with these things and sort of engaging in like political and social action, I think is like largely just hugely important. So good luck on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely right. That's what this is about. It's not about one time hitting a politician to make them look bad. It's about getting people to start talking about discussions that they really need to be having, that the media isn't having. And yeah, I just want to thank you guys for doing that.
All right.
Cool. Thanks so much, guys. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.